Welcome to today's Foster and Freeman webinar on fibres and hairs. My name is Yvonne Turner and I work in application support at Foster and Freeman. Please be aware we are muting all guests, but you are able to ask questions throughout the webinar using the chat box. At the end of the webinar, we will have our live question and answer session, where as many of your questions will be answered as possible in the time allowed. Thank you. Today's webinar is based on forensic hair and fibre detection analysis. Stray hairs and minute broken fragments of fibres can provide forensic examiners with vital clues during a criminal investigation, potentially connecting a suspect or victim with a crime scene. In this webinar, we take a look at the latest technologies for detecting and analysing these items of high evidential value using our very own Foster and Freeman products. I've always had a passion for fibres, and it was the reason for my association with Foster and Freeman, working on a prototype to reduce the tedium of fibre searching. Another paper was published at this time. The examination of fibres and hairs can be a long and painstaking exercise, demanding attention to detail. It's not complicated, but it does require commitment, and it's often considered tedious. But with that comes rewards. Advances in the sensitivity of DNA techniques has meant there are far fewer occasions where DNA evidence is not used to demonstrate contact. Contact between victim and suspect, victim or suspect and the scene, vehicle or weapon. However, a considerable number of fibres of unusual composition and of different colours and types can still provide strong evidence to either corroborate DNA evidence or when no DNA evidence can be found. Fibres and hairs in most environmental conditions are resistant to biological, physical and chemical degradation and can persist for long periods of time. And because fibres are involved in most everyday activities, it stands to reason they are also involved in most crime scenes. Around the world, forensic science laboratories are still using fibres and hairs evidence to bring suspects to trial. To highlight the importance of finding fibres and hairs at a crime scene, we're going to take a look at a well-known case, the Soham case, which had a breakthrough of evidence based on fibres and hairs.
Good evening. Police in Cambridgeshire have staged a reconstruction of the last known movements of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. The 10-year-old girls went missing 6 days ago in their hometown of Soham. Detectives now say there is no evidence that Holly and Jessica went to meet someone they contacted in an internet chat room. Clarence Mitchell reports from Soham.
Taking their walk towards the unknown, these are the last identified steps of Holly and Jessica. Recreated by 2 young girls from a drama company in Cambridge, they were wearing identical clothing and jewellery to the missing 10-year-olds. Their Manchester United shirts the same, along with their sports trousers. Their hair, too, styled as closely to Holly and Jessica's as possible. The aim to jog people's memories of last Sunday.
This case didn't benefit from the Foster and Freeman technology that's currently available to crime scene investigators and forensic scientists. We were very lucky to have contacted an ex-colleague of mine, a senior forensic scientist at the Forensic Science Service, Peter Lamb, who played a vital role in the investigation of this case. He will now say a few words about his experiences.
Modern techniques in forensic science rely heavily on rapid, reliable DNA testing, and we've become accustomed to powerful statistical evidence of match probabilities. However, traditional forensic science techniques still have a place in complex investigations, and I want to briefly mention one example where fibre and hair evidence were crucial to the case, because no probative DNA was ever found. In August 2002, two 10-year-old girls disappeared from the family barbecue in Soham, Cambridgeshire. A photograph taken just before showed the girls dressed in identical Manchester United tops. CCTV showed them walking through Soham towards the school, but they were never seen alive again. Eventually, the inquiry focused on the school caretaker, Ian Huntley. His home, his car, and the school were searched, and tapings were taken for potential hair and fibre work. During later searches of the school workshop, a bin containing the burned remains of the two girls' clothing was found. All of these items were sent to the Forensic Science Laboratory at Huntingdon for examination. The aim was to determine whether there was any evidence to associate Ian Huntley or someone else with the girls' clothing. A detailed strategy was developed and agreed with the police. During our investigations, low power, high power, blue and ultraviolet light microscopy was used to find fibres of interest. Then birefringent microscopy, followed by microspectrophotometry and dye analysis, identified target fibres. In addition, hairs of interest were recovered from tapings and other items for detailed microscopic examination and comparisons. Although these examinations might be time-consuming and hence in the regime expensive, compelling evidence was produced showing both one-way and two-way transfers of fibres between the girls, Ian Huntley, his car, and his home. As well as fibres, hairs from Ian Huntley were found on the girls' clothing from the bin at the school. The findings were presented to the courts in November 2003 using a novel presentation conveying the multitude of complex fibre exchanges. In December 2003, the jury found Ian Huntley guilty and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. The use of crime lights at both scene and in the laboratory greatly aided our investigations. There is no doubt that advancements in light technology and microscopy and the development of new products will have reduced the time taken to perform such examinations in modern forensic science investigations. Without hair and fibre evidence, Ian Huntley may never have been brought to justice.
Thank you, Peter, for that fascinating insight. So, textile fibres and hairs at the crime scene. The volume crime scene is very different from the major crime scene. Textile products at the volume crime scene might present themselves as whole items left by an offender, such as a glove discarded at the scene, or as a visible group of fibres left behind, like in a clump of fibres caught on the glass window frame. Because of the requirement to be selective with potential evidence from the volume crime scene, a crime scene investigator will normally restrict the seizure of such fibres to those most likely to relate to the offender's activity. Examples would include fibres trapped in fittings around the point of entry or exit, or in a broken glass related to offender entry or exit. Consequently, the balance of seizure of textile products differs distinctly when compared with major crime, in which the quantities of whole items of clothing associated with victims and offenders are likely to be much greater and are much more likely to be submitted for further forensic examination. The Crimelight Auto is one of the latest additions to our Crimelight range and can be introduced as the most complete and compact forensic digital camera solution in existence. The Crimelight Auto is a compact handheld device combining the latest forensic imaging technology with high-intensity multispectral illumination. The examiner can perform real-time visible, fluorescent and infrared examinations to quickly reveal the presence of evidence, including hair and suspect fibres. With up to 55 illumination wavebands and built-in filters, the Crimelight Auto has the full capability to document evidence at the crime scene using a high UV visible infrared camera to capture images and live video beyond the visible spectrum. The importance of the Auto is in the efficiency of the examination, the speed of which the fibres and hairs can be found, and it's all about location and retrieval at the crime scene. While some fibres will be obvious at the scene, some can be imperceptible and thus may only become apparent upon examination at the laboratory. However, by using the Crimelight Auto, this non-destructive technique using high-intensity light sources used by crime scene investigators may be able to detect these. This technique causes fibres to fluoresce, allowing their presence to become more apparent. Fibres and textiles collected at a scene should be photographed in situ before being recovered. Although this is problematic where areas are being speculatively taped for the possibility of fibre transfer, but no visible traces are present that might be captured in a photograph. So now we're going to the crime scene demo to see the Crimelight Auto in action, showing the very easy visibility of fibres at a crime scene.
So why is searching for fibres so important? Types of trace evidence like hairs and fibres can provide information about whether or not there has been any physical contact between different individuals, or whether or not someone has been present at the crime scene. With any form of physical contact, we might be looking at cases like sexual assaults, where we're looking for hairs, fibres, either at the scene or even on the victim. At the crime scene, fibres from someone's clothing may be left there. For example, it may be found on the glass or around the point of entry in a burglary, such as a window. But before we recover them, first we have to find them. Now, fibres fluoresce across the entire spectrum. We will need sometimes a range of different light sources to find them. Fibres fluoresce differently across the spectrum under different light sources, often because of the different type of fibre we're looking for, and also because of things like the dye composition. The Crimelight Auto offers a range of different light sources all the way across the spectrum, from UV into the visible, including fluorescence, and even into the infrared part of the spectrum. With the Crimelight Auto, it has a range of different light sources through the simple user interface. You simply click on the light source and the correct filter will move into place for you. With its integrated 20.1 megapixel camera, we are then able to capture images of fibres and provide you with high quality images. These images can be easily sent over the built-in Wi-Fi capabilities back to the lab before you've even left the crime scene. With the Crimelight Auto, we're also able to perform simple basic enhancements of your images, all of which is recorded in the metadata of the images. And because of the easy to use user interface, we're able to view everything through the screen. So there's no requirement for you or any other scene examiners to wear goggles. The Crimelight Auto has a live mode view, so you can see what's happening in real time. As well as capturing images, you're also able to capture HD video if required. The strength and value of fibre evidence often depends on the number of types of fibres recovered, but can provide excellent corroborative evidence.
As we've seen, using the Crimelight Auto at the crime scene, we can search, detect and capture hairs and fibres in situ at the click of a button. It's so intuitive to operate as it's a compact and portable unit, and with the new Crimelight app, we're able to send the captured images and videos from the crime scene directly to the laboratory. We can even control the auto using the app function. It's a new and essential tool for crime scene examiners. The all-in-one unit provides all the wavelengths of light and filters necessary to show the unique fluorescence of textile fibres. The Crimelight ML Pro is also a new addition to our Crimelight range. It's a laboratory tool used for the search and detection of evidence such as fibres and hairs. Whether or not efforts have been made at the crime scene to recover textiles directly from a body, it is essential that the body be re-examined at the mortuary before post-mortem examination. Two important areas for examining for fibres are the head and the pubic hair. Again, levels of priority for these examinations are dependent on the circumstances of the individual case in question. These areas can contain small groups of fibres that might have been deposited via close physical contact in cases involving assault. Fingernails must also be checked for fibres and should be scraped at the outset of the post-mortem examination. The ML Pro is a great tool to locate and visualise these fibres under the fingernails prior to them being scraped. Introducing the FFTA. The FFTA is a range of analytical facilities on a single microscope operated through a single PC. It is a modular, multifunctional workstation for the analysis of trace evidence, including textile fibres and hairs, and of course other evidence types. The 4 modules in the FFTA that are best used to analyse fibres and hairs are Raman spectroscopy, UV visible infrared microspectrometry, polarised light microscopy, and digital image processing. The FFTA polarised light microscope is used for the analysis and identification of fibres. It's a widely used forensic science technique, and it's able to characterise and identify microscopic samples. The module includes a 360-degree rotary polarisation stage, microscope objective, polarizer and interference colour chart to determine birefringence for all your fibres. The UV visible and infrared microspectrometer is used for the analysis of organic compounds. It has a choice of wavelengths 240 to 1000 nanometers or 400 to 1000 nanometers. It captures absorption, reflection and transmission spectra. Precise quantitative comparison of samples is possible, and it's used to measure and compare fibres and other evidence types. The module also includes NIST traceable filters, NIST wavelength calibration standard, and lab sphere colour measurement standard. The FFTA is chosen by laboratories for its flexibility because you can quickly switch between functions for different applications. It offers value for money in its multiple use of a single microscope, and new modules can be added to meet customer requirements. It's of exceptional quality, manufactured to the very highest standards, with an exceptional quality of pre- and post-sales support. And now we're going to the laboratory demonstration, where a colleague of mine at Foster & Freeman is going to show you the FFTA in action, analysing textile fibres and hairs.
We have some suspected hairs and some textile fibres that have been recovered from the crime scene. Here we have the Foster & Freeman FFTA, the Trace Evidence Analysis System, and we're going to be using the UV Vis NIR microspectrometer module to examine the textile fibres. We have a fibre here mounted on a quartz slide in glycerin, and we're going to use this system to take some absorption measurements of these fibres that are recovered from the crime scene. And then the system will automatically determine the scan time based on the amount of light that is transmitting through the system, and it will record that 10 times, which I've set here as the number of repeat measurements it will take in order to create a spectral average. Okay, this just improves our signal to noise. Okay, once it's done, we click OK. And now we need to record a dark reference. Okay, so once the white reference and dark reference has completed, we just now need to position our fibre under the crosshairs, as indicated on the live video feed. Make sure that the fibre is in focus, and we can record our spectrum. So we'll take 5 measurements for this particular fibre here that I can see as a man-made fibre, and then we'll repeat the process for our questioned fibres. Okay, so once we've recorded our repeat measurements for the control fibre, we're now going to place in our sample already prepared for the question fibres. So we just need to swap the samples over, and then we need to find those on the slide. There we go. Get that in focus. Because we've now swapped the sample over, we would now need to record the white and dark reference measurements again before we start taking our spectral measurements of this fibre. So now we're going to take a look at the FFTA imaging suite. This is again custom software, actually originally designed for our video spectral comparator systems and adapted for our FFTA microscope system. The imaging suite allows us to take advantage of the 5 megapixel Gigi camera to allow us to take high resolution images, and also calibrated measurements of our trace evidence. So place the sample in, and then we're going to just find our evidence of interest, and here we have our red fibres that we were looking at earlier on the UV-Vis microspec. Okay, so get the fibre in the appropriate position and get it in focus. So here we can use the software to take high quality images of our fibre. We can use the annotations and measurements function to either annotate the image with some information, so we can put a text box on, annotate it with the details that we require. We could use it to point out features on the fibre, so here we can see the particles of delustrant, and we can use the software to point out features of interest. If we check the objective that we're using, here we're using a 40 times objective, we can set that function in the software, and we can also now use that to take accurate calibrated measurements, in this case the diameter of the fibre here coming in at 20 microns. Once we're finished with that, we can make those annotations permanent, and we can send those to our recent images gallery or save the images as we wish. Okay, once we've finished with that one, we can now take some images of our other sample. Okay, so here's our red fibre. And again, we can see that this time there's no delustrant particles. We can take our measurements again, take our accurate measurement. If you want to take a few across the width of the fibre, if there's a bit of variation, you can take as many as you need. And then we can make that annotation permanent and send that down to the recent images gallery. Let's take another one without the annotations. And using the software, we can now do a side-by-side comparison as well of these two fibres. So we can switch to side-by-side. We can keep this one as our live measurement if we want, and then we just need to drag and drop our sample from the first examination over into our second window here. Because we've got it live, we can reposition our sample to be in a similar orientation to the one that we took before. We can see that side by side they are in fact very different physically. We can use the imaging modes to perform an overlay as well, so we can mix the two images together. We can use the software to superimpose the two images over the top of one another, like so. And then we can use various imaging features like a horizontal split, where we can look at the two with a horizontal split or a vertical split. So here we can really point out the differences between the fibres. We could put on a strobe effect, so we can strobe between image 1 and image 2. And with a split image, we can of course capture that in here. We could then just go back to the single image, and again we can then drag and drop back into here as our sort of stored image, and again we can sort of go back to the annotations and measurements if we need to. So here we can sort of point out various functions, features, like so. If I go back to the side by side, again I can very quickly drag and drop the images that I recorded earlier, and here we can also see that the size of the fibres are quite different. The fibre here on the left hand side is about 15 microns, and then the other fibre over here we're comparing it to is about 20 microns. So quite easily we can generate high quality, high resolution images and use the calibrated measurements function to take accurate measurements of our samples.
We can use Foster and Freeman products for non-destructive techniques to locate and identify our fibres and hairs. We can use them at the crime scene, in the mortuary, and in the forensic science laboratory. Every contact leaves a trace. We know we can link victims and suspects to crime scenes, and victims and suspects to vehicles and weapons in the absence of DNA using these Foster and Freeman products. We're now going to go to our live Q&A session. Please use the chat box to ask any questions and we'll answer as many as possible. Thank you.